They are the most feared soldiers in all of Europe, a force of nature that carves a path of death and destruction wherever they go. This is the great heathen army, and this is their bloody history. It's me. You're watching this channel. And today we're answering the question, what happened to England in 865 AD? The year is 865 AD, and the Anglo-Saxons have a problem. They've got Vikings. Oh, wait, no, they don't just have Vikings. That would be like saying that the Romans had a few Gauls. These aren't your average Scandinavian seafarers. This is the great heathen army, a force of thousands of warriors intent on making war on England. Now, it's important to understand who these guys were. See, there are three main groups of people we usually lump under the heading Vikings. There are the Northmen, or Norsemen, hailing from Norway and Denmark. They did most of their pillaging around the British Isles and Iceland. Then there are the Swedes, coming from what we today call Sweden, though back then it was called Svitjod. They preferred to raid along the coast of northern Europe and in the Baltic Sea. And finally, there are the Geats. The Geats came from southern Sweden, and they were by far the most famous of the Viking raiders, thanks to the legendary exploits of their kings. But whatever their origin, they all shared a common culture, language, and religion. And so, when large numbers of them set sail across the North Sea for England, they brought with them the fury of 1,000 screaming wolves. In fact, they were so numerous that it's hard for us to know exactly how many there were. Estimates put their total strength somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 warriors. Now, that might not sound like an especially impressive number. After all, the Roman army at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, which defeated Hannibal and ended the Second Punic War, had 25,000 men. But remember that the great heathen army wasn't some conscripted rabble. These guys were hardened veterans of countless battles, each one of them a potential killer. Even if we take a low estimate of their numbers, that's still more than enough to pose a serious threat to the Anglo-Saxons, whose armies rarely numbered over 4,000 men. But that's not even the half of it. The Vikings also had hundreds of longships, vessels designed for speed rather than cargo capacity. These ships were terrifying sights as they sliced through the waves, carrying their wolf-like crews straight towards the heart of England. As the ships approached, the terror they inspired among the Anglo-Saxons could only be matched by the awe they inspired in their own ranks. For as the warriors launched their longships into the waves and set sail for new lands, they knew that Odin himself was with them, guiding their oars and filling their sails with wind. But why were they attacking England? Well, there were two main reasons. First was trade. Back in the 790s, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were in the midst of a golden age. In fact, that's a relative term since it was hardly golden for the people living in Scandinavia. But compared to the preceding half-century, which saw the Anglo-Saxons at war with the Britons, the 790s were pretty peaceful. As a result, trade flourished and the Anglo-Saxons became quite wealthy. Now, that wasn't something the Vikings were keen on allowing to continue. And so they began to attack the English trading ships and coastal towns. But there was another reason too. See, while the Anglo-Saxons were having a good time, the native Britons were having a terrible one. And they needed someone to help them out. Enter Offa of Mercia. Now, Offa was a legendary king of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia. He ruled from 757 to 796 and is best known for Offa's Dyke, a 177-mile-long earthwork that still stands as the largest man-made topographical feature in Britain. But Offa was also something of a warlord. In fact, during his reign, he conquered half of England. He waged wars against Northumbria, East Anglia, and the Witches people, as well as launching a campaign into northern France. But despite all his martial successes, Offa knew he couldn't conquer all of England on his own. And so he appealed to his friend Charlemagne, the Frankish king, for help. Now, Charlemagne was happy to help his buddy, but he didn't have any armies available. So instead he offered Offa something else. He offered him weapons. Offa accepted and soon found himself with a formidable fighting force. And with that, he marched on the kingdom of Northumbria and conquered it. Then he marched on East Anglia and conquered that too. And after that, he went to the witches and conquered them as well. By the end of his reign, Offa had conquered half of England. Not bad for a guy who couldn't even conquer one full kingdom. Now, all of this conquering was great news for Offa, but it was terrible news for the Britons. You see, Offa had promised the people of northern England that he would protect them from the Vikings, but he never kept his promise. Instead, the Vikings kept attacking, and the Britons kept getting slaughtered. As a result, the Britons turned to the Scandinavian kings for help and made a deal with them. The Vikings would help defend the Britons from the Anglo-Saxons in exchange for plunder. Now, to their credit, the Vikings kept their part of the bargain. They attacked the Anglo-Saxons who took a lot of plunder. In fact, they took so much plunder that King Egbert of Wessex, who was trying to unify all of England under his rule, had to raise an army to stop them. And so in 865 AD, Egbert led his army to meet the great heathen army at the Battle of Ashdown. The battle was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But ultimately the Vikings won, pushing Egbert and his army back to the River Kennet. From there, they continued their rampage, pillaging across southern England until Egbert could raise another army to stop them. Now, before we move on, a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, moving on. Egbert was able to rally his forces quickly and soon marched north to confront the Vikings once again. This time, he met them at the Battle of Ellendale in 866 AD. Now, we don't know much about this battle except that it was fought near the town of Ware and that Egbert won. But that's about it. But we do know that the battle marked the end of the Great Heathen Army's first campaign in England. You see, after losing at Ellendale, the Vikings pulled back to their ship and sailed home. We're not sure why they left, but it probably had something to do with the fact that they had spent the better part of 2 years raiding England and needed a break. Or maybe Egbert bribed them to leave. It doesn't say in the sources, but it wouldn't surprise me. Whatever the case, the Vikings didn't stay away for long. In 869, they returned to England with an even larger fleet and army, intent on finishing what they started. Once again, they landed their troops along the English coast and began pillaging inland. And once again, Egbert had to raise an army to stop them. This time, he brought together every single Anglo-Saxon king and lord he could find, and they met the Vikings at the Battle of the River Car. Once again, the battle was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But once again, Egbert won, forcing the Vikings to retreat back to their ships and sail away. But you'd be wrong. In fact, the opposite happened. After the Battle of the River Car, the Vikings went on a rampage across England, sacking monasteries, villages, and towns. They pillaged east and west, killing everyone in their path until finally Egbert could raise yet another army to stop them. This time, he met them at the Battle of Sinwit in 878, and this time, there was no contest. Egbert's army was simply too strong for the Vikings. They fell back to their ships and sailed away, never to return. In the aftermath of the Battle of Sinwith, Egbert was able to finally unite all of England under his rule. As for the Vikings, they headed back to Scandinavia, where they would go on to carve out their own kingdoms and establish a new Viking age. I'm the host. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.